Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar with us. I'm Hannah Vickers, I'm the Chief Exec of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. So apologies there if we had a little bit of a technical glitch at the start of that, but hopefully you're with us now. And if you're not, you may be watching this again and watching this back, so you wouldn't have even noticed. I shouldn't have mentioned it. So welcome to this. This is a unique webinar, shall we say. This is our webinar this afternoon around navigating COVID, but really it's a sort of catch up on everything that has been changing quite rapidly over the last few weeks. So this is a one-off special just to catch us all up on the multitude of changes that we've had in terms of the different business support items that are available. So we're going to be joined a little later by Claire Clifford, who is our HR Director and Head of Business Support at ACE. So she will be just taking us through and giving a bit of a rundown on exactly what has changed and also taking your questions. So if we just move forward into the next slide. If you haven't joined us before for one of these, there's some housekeeping for you. This is aimed at ACE members, but if you're not an ACE member and from the wider industry, you're very welcome anyway. A lot of this will be relevant because it is just general sort of good business sense and business updates. So you're very welcome. Don't feel you have to leave if you're not an ACE member. We're delighted to have you. Just to get the most out of this webinar today, a few things. You will have a much nicer experience if you listen through headphones. So, you know, plug those in. We are going to be recording this if you're watching it live, so you will be able to share it later on. So we will send the link round. And lastly, just around questions, if you could pop your questions into the Q&A panel, so you'll see the little green button at the bottom. You should be able to click that, ask us questions. We will have plenty of time for questions today, so please put those in. The whole point of this is for you to ask those specific questions, maybe things you haven't been able to locate for yourself in the guidance. So please do keep those coming in. And you don't have to declare yourself, you can ask them anonymously, absolutely fine. What we want is just things that people feel like they need to know, people need clarifying just around the guidance and the support that is currently available. So I touched on it already, we will be recording this and it will be on our website. We will also send the link to everybody who's registered so you can watch it back and refresh yourself. So we've got a short agenda today. It's a little bit of a, I think of it like a little TV programme where we're going to have a conversation about this rather than a big, long presentation. So what we're going to have are two sections to this. So firstly, we're going to focus on some of the changes and the latest guidance around the job retention scheme. So just to make sure that everybody's sort of up to speed with what's happened there. There've been some very recent announcements, some very recent changes of direction, shall we say, with government on that. So there's a little bit of catching everybody up on the job retention scheme with Claire Clifford. And then I'm going to do just a little bit around some of the grants and the business loans that are available, just to remind you again, might be useful for your financial planning over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. Finally, we're going to have a bit of Q&A at the end. So I've got some questions for Claire. I'm sure you will have some, and we will do our best to answer them. Any that we can't get through today or we need to sort of take away and seek further guidance on, we will do and come back to you at a later date. But we'll try and get through as many today. Like I said, we've got Claire, who is most definitely an expert in this, much more so than myself. So anything you ask me, you're probably going to have to go and take away. But I'm sure Claire will be able to answer a lot of your questions. So please do keep those coming in. We have got the full hour today. We may or may not use it. We'll just see how we go. We've got a few sort of slides of presentation materials, but really this is about trying to have a bit of discussion and some questions for sort of things that we are perhaps not so sure on. Okay, thank you. So I'd like to now introduce Claire to you. I'm very excited about this. This is Claire's first webinar, so you have to be kind. So for those of you who listened to us before, you'll know that we often have guest speakers. I'm really pleased that we have Claire, who has been recently appointed as Head of Business Support and Corporate Services within ACE. She's got a brilliant background and a great depth of experience from across a number of industries. So going forward, you're going to see a lot more of Claire in our sort of ACE member offering. She's going to be championing skills for us, as well as doing this sort of detailed business support on the kind of here and now for those of you that perhaps don't have in-house HR expertise and specialists. So very big job ahead of Claire, but we're so delighted to have her. She's brilliant and like it's a breath of fresh air really in terms of this sort of support for our members. So makes it a bit fun as well. So over to you, Claire. Would you like to just give us a bit of an overview of where we're up to with the job retention scheme and how that has changed over the last few weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for the introduction. I'm delighted to join ACE as well. So yeah, I look forward to doing more of these and interacting with the members as well. But yeah, today is really to talk about job retention scheme. And I thought a good place to start is to look how far we've come. Who would have thought that, you know, we would have had so many changes in the HR world, specifically. Normally, just April and October is the time where HR professionals need to really concentrate on legal changes and changes within the workplace that affect employees. But we've certainly had a journey so far. Way back in March, when the government introduced the scheme. And I think it took a while for all of us to understand the benefits and how it could really help the business. Since then, as you can see on the timeline, we've had extensions, changes. We've gone from 80% down to 60% in terms of what we can claim back. But I thought it was a good idea for us to have a look and see how much has changed. We've had some tweaks, and I think the most recent information, and we'll go into a bit more detail in a second, is around that period of extension. So on the 30th of October, it was announced that we will move forward with a continuation of the job support schemes, and that has allowed us to continue to retain employment of people who may or otherwise have to be made redundant or exit the business. And it also gives the business opportunity to have a bit of a breather, knowing that they can claim currently 80% of the basic wages for their employees, should they be furloughing them. Furlough in itself is pretty new words, I think, for 2020. It's not something that we've really had in our vocabulary. So it's taken us a while to get to understand furloughing. But the main piece is if you have employees who you can't afford to continue to work for you, or you don't have the work for them coming in, then you are able to furlough these individuals. And then you will be able to make a claim to the government for 80% of the salary. There's a bit more detail we go into in a minute, and who's eligible and how to do it, but it's relatively straightforward this time around, because we've learned a lot of how we do submissions and who's eligible. So from now until March next year, 2021, we'll be able to furlough those employees. I think the biggest thing to point out at this stage, though, is whilst currently it's at the 80%, it is not guaranteed to continue at that percentage. So please don't budget for that for January, February and March. January, there will be an announcement as to what percentage we will be able to claim back. Currently, at the moment, it's looking like that we could end up doing that ratchet down scheme, but there is nothing that's been actually confirmed yet from the government. So this will carry on. So as you can see on slide January 21, there'll be a percentage review, so we must keep an eye on that. And I'm sure that Hannah, I and the team will make sure we come back out to you if there are and when there are announcements made. I think one of the other big things to remember as well is around self-employed. So if you are not a direct employee, there is some self-employment income, and that continues as well. So there are additional grants. We're currently in the third grant for self-employed income scheme. It's slightly more complicated, and I think that's something probably not to go into detail on this webinar, but to take away on maybe some one-to-one discussions if people need some help with that. There will be a fourth grant, but there are no details about that yet. So when we go into 2021, much like the change maybe in the percentage that you can claim back for furloughed employees, we'll come out to you with some more information. But I think for me personally, it's great to see that we still continue to get some support into 2021, especially over this Christmas period when there's often uncertainties anyway. This does allow us to support our employees the best way we can. If we could move to the next slide, that would be great, thank you. So I said we'll go into a bit more detail around the furlough scheme, and whilst many people watching this will have already partaken in the scheme previously back in the summer in lockdown 1, I think it's really important for us to remember some of the pieces that have tripped us up along this journey where maybe the advice hasn't been so clear as it could be. So I wanted to pull out some key points that we may miss, and we must make sure that we're following the correct process. So the biggest thing is the employees must be consulted on, and I think most HR and business leaders understand that. We need to talk to the employees and gain their permission to put them onto furlough. This isn't a long, lengthy process like some of the other HR processes we need to follow, but it does need to be done. We do need to talk to our employee because we are making a change to their income. We are making a change to the contractual terms. Once you've done that, you can then decide as a business whether or not you top up the 80%. So the government will pay 80% of unworked hours, and employers will probably have a cost of about 5% for national insurance tax, that type of thing, the deductions. You can make a decision whether or not you top up to 100% of that person's salary. And obviously that does come down to a business decision and also thinking about retaining your employees for the longer term. One thing that a lot of people did miss the first time round was you do have to pay annual leave and public holidays at 100%. So you will need to top up those days. We've obviously got Christmas, New Year falling on a weekend. So we have the additional holiday on the Monday this year. So please make sure that you are factoring that in, that additional top up of 20% for your employees. So I said you need to consult with them. You need to agree as a business how your furlough scheme will work. And then we need to confirm all of this in writing, as we always do. And we need to keep it for 6 years because it's linked to pay. Hmrc, like most of the documentation within the payroll function, you will need to keep this documentation for 6 years. It can be electronic. It doesn't need to be hard copy. In fact, electronic is probably much better nowadays. We're all remote. But you can see there that it's basic things. So anybody that's using a payroll bureau, they should be able to produce this information for you. If not, a simple spreadsheet on Excel to track these hours worked and the claim reference numbers when you submit online. This is just good housekeeping, really. Could you turn to the next slide for me, please? Awesome. So the first slide's about everything going well. You're having your conversations with your employees and you've got their agreement and you're moving along to processing the furlough. But we are aware that some employees will not want to be furloughed for a variety of reasons. And I think the biggest thing is to have a discussion with the employer around furloughing them and what that means to them, business now and longer term. If an employee does not agree to be furloughed, you do have the right to dismiss them for a reason of redundancy. There are some caveats with that, which again is a bigger presentation, which we probably best to pick up on an individual basis. But yes, you do have the right. So if there is a fundamental impact to your business and therefore there is no work that could be coming in for these employees, then you are able to look at the redundancy route. Bear in mind, there are additional costs that could come with taking the redundancy route, as well as longer term impacts on losing skills and knowledge from your business. The recently extended furlough scheme does have some real clear differences. On the whole, it's similar. You submit in the same way, you retain information the same way, and the principles are there as well. But they have been very clear around claim and submission dates online. So if you miss submitting on time, you have to have a very strong reason for Hmrc to agree for you to have a late claim. So we've got the information now, we have got plenty of time. So I would make a note of the 14th of the month in your diaries ongoing. This is the date in which you do need to make your claims online. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, thinking about the employee, they are accruing annual leave, which again is something that people miss. They didn't really think that they've put somebody on furlough for a few months. When they've come back off furlough, they've then got this large amount of leave that they're entitled to continue to own. So if they don't book any leave, there is a caveat now, especially come out in terms of this COVID provision, that your employees are able to carry over their leave. So that is another reason to have a good discussion with your employee at the beginning of that consultation. Once it's agreed, talk to them about what it's going to look like. You're going to need to pay their leave. You're going to need to top up the 80% if the people are on leave. And if they don't take leave, then you're going to have to pay them or allow them to take that leave over into 2021. Can be quite a costly exercise, because remember, in 2021 they then accruing their new annual leave and potentially more furlough. Who knows what's around the corner? So it's really important to think about that planning, and where possible, you may want to consider that furloughed employees are asked to take annual leave, and you're well within your right as an employer to do this. As it says on the last bullet point there, you need to give them notice. So if you want them to take a week off, you need to give them 2 weeks notice for them to take that week off. You then would just process the top-up payments from the 80 to 100% of their salary for that time. And I think with the Christmas periods coming up, it may be a great opportunity to have a look at who you actually do need in the business, who you want on furlough, and who you might like on annual leave furlough. I hope that all makes sense. Yeah, brilliant. It's in bold there for a very good reason. Whatever you do, you are not permitted to undertake work when you're on furlough. I think we got that last time round. I think now we might be sort of thinking, oh, well, we can just do that in the background, or I'll just ask them to do that. Absolutely not. They need to not be undertaking work. They could be on a flexi furlough, which we haven't really spoken about in this presentation, but there is an opportunity to work part-time during this furlough period. But the biggest thing you need to do with those employees who are not undertaking work is still maintain your duty of care. So as an employer, you do have a duty of care under the Health and Safety Executive to make sure that your employees are safe at home, even when on furlough, and to make sure that they've got good wellbeing and mental health. So I would make sure that, again, as part of that discussion of putting somebody onto furlough, you start having a discussion around how you're going to communicate with them. It's really important that they know when you're going to call, because when they're on furlough, they're not working, so they're not awaiting your call. So they might have had a lie-in, they might have their children at home, they might be doing their exercise. So please, have that discussion at the beginning to arrange time ahead of time to speak to your team members. And I know that sometimes it takes that bit of extra time out of the diary, but by keeping up that communication and engagement, when you do have your teams return from furlough, they will still feel like part of the organisation. They'll still be loyal and engaged, and their return will be much more smoother than if you've had a period of time off. So anxiety and stress and worry builds in when you're sat at home not knowing what's going on. And we want to make sure that as an employer, we overcome that and make it as smooth as possible for everyone returning. So communication is absolutely vital with those people that are at home and on furlough, but just don't ask them to do the work. So you've got people on furlough, you've got people still working from home. We mustn't forget about those people that are not on furlough. The people who aren't on furlough is quite a tricky one, especially if you've got half a team that are and half a team that aren't. It's quite a lot of, engagement and conversation and communication to manage. So your duty of care continues as it would do in an office for those people working from home or maybe on a site. You do need to make sure that their environment is fit for purpose, and a lot of people are working out of bedrooms, off of ironing boards, kitchen, dining room tables, and that's fine, that's not a problem, but you do need to make sure you're aware of their situation and supporting them the best you can. So we suggest you carry out a DSE, so a display screen equipment assessment. It's free. You can go and download the documentation on websites. I'm sure we can share something with the members as well. And it's a good opportunity when doing that assessment to open up conversations, start talking to your people who are working from home, how they're feeling, what they're up to, what are the points which are causing a little bit of stress now that they're working from home versus in the office. The other thing that's really important is to update your COVID-19 workplace assessment as per all the government advice. So any on-site requirements that you need to make sure you're COVID secure. I haven't seen very recent updates come out in the last few weeks, but I'm sure things will continue to evolve as more information around how the disease is spread continues to evolve. Also, one of the things that has really slipped through the net for all of us is this point around lone working. So when we're in office or when we're in a certain environment that would have someone working on their own, we would think about that. We would make sure that, maybe there's someone in another building that they've checked in with, or that, where they've got their mobile phone if they're going out on a site visit alone, that type of thing. But when someone's working from home, it's not as easy. We don't really think about them being at home alone, but it's just as important. So if you have somebody who you believe may be a lone worker that you've picked up as part of the conversation about either putting someone on furlough or somebody working remotely, again, find a mechanism to check in with them. You know, once a day, make sure their Outlook is updated, just a way in which you know that, you know, your person is safe working from home. And the other piece is invaluable for everybody, but especially those working alone or at home on furlough, not on furlough, is around wellbeing. You know, make sure you really listen to your employees when you do have that interaction engagement with them. Are they telling you something in a roundabout way? Are they asking you a question? Have you really heard what they're saying? Spend that time just talking to them about how their day is. Don't just pick up the phone to talk about the to-do list. Talk more around how they are. What else could the organisation be doing to help them feel better, improve their productivity, etc.
Oh, interesting. I think we have a slight broadband issue there. I'm just gonna I'm gonna continue because we've gone past the technical part, so I'll just sort of talk you through this slide while we try and get Claire back online. So these really are, I think, just the kind of wrap up slide now around things that are useful. So you, again, in the plethora of government guidance that's come out, you might well have missed some of these, and this is something, again, we will be able to circulate to you after this. But effectively, these are some useful tools that we've had around there. The postcode checker, I think, is quite important for particularly maybe when we come out of these national lockdowns that we have been in. So if you're in Wales or you're in Scotland, I think this is really important for you in terms of being able to be aware of how it's changing where your staff are. So more so, you know, everybody will know where they are and what their restrictions are. But if you want to just cross check and perhaps you're, you know, not completely clear or things are changing faster than you can keep track, that postcode checker is really useful just to see, you know, where your particular staff are based, where they live, what are they actually experiencing, and just being cognizant of that. So Claire, I can see you're back.
Yes, I'm talking to myself.
Cool impersonation of you. So I only got through the postcode checker. So okay. I'll run through the others. I think you'll do a much better job than me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've done the postcode checker. It's great. Since these slides, I think there's also a new postcode checker come out for Scotland as a result of going into level 4 yesterday. I think it won't be linked to this one, so we'll double check that, and if we need to update it and add another piece on to the slide for everybody, we can do that. COVID-19 tests is still a bit controversial. Some people really want all of their employees to have a test, etc. Please click on this link and follow the guidelines. How to book a test, who should book a test, how we stop the transmission, how long people should be self-isolating for, etc. That link will take you straight to all of that information. And then if you need to work out furlough and working hours, you could spend all day trying to do it. Click on the link, you could put in some details. It will help you calculate how many hours somebody has worked versus how many hours in a week they've been on furlough. And then finally, I think this is where we got cut off, and when I was talking to myself and we was around the wellbeing piece, so I'm not sure how much you heard of that, but it's so important whether your employees are on furlough, whether they are working remotely, working on site, or even taking some time out on holiday, that their well-being is really, really looked after. So a great place to start is Minds. So it's a charity, it's free of charge to obtain information. And I've attached that link as well, because it will lead you, it's a good signpost to lead you to other areas. But there's some good pieces on there on how you as a manager can look after yourself in order to look after other people. But then, as I say, there's some signposts of where you can go for additional help if you feel an individual in an organisation has got some concerns. So they're really, really quite useful.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. That was really, really thorough walkthrough of everything that's changed. So I've got a few questions, but just before we come to those, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview myself. This is an old version of me with longer hair. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview myself around some of the finance and the grants that are available, have been available, again, just to give the sort of full picture. So just to give you everything in one place, and again, all of this is on our website, but just for the purposes of kind of bringing it to your attention. So the number of things that we have around ongoing support that have been put in place. So we've got the Vat Deferrals. So you would have been able to defer the VAT. I think the important thing to recognise here is that this is just a deferral. So it's not cancelling the VAT. So again, just thinking if you have done that, even just making sure that you have then put that into your cash flow for next year. So there is a piece there around that. We're not at the moment expecting further flexibilities on VAT, but then there is the spending review and the budget next week. So I should caveat everything in terms of this business support part of the presentation, where we may well see some changes next week in terms of business support, albeit I think we've seen the sort of bigger ones in the headlines. So if we do see anything, it may be minor. There may be further things around VAT deferral, but we won't see anything, I think, too radical in terms of cancellations. So that's in place at the moment. There might be something further on it next Wednesday in the spending review. We've also then got the sort of flexibility around time to pay with Hmrc. This is something that they had previously, but I think they're just being a little bit more flexible. Again, it's worth considering. They will, under the current sort of restrictions and regime we have in place, try to accommodate that. I think at the time there were some challenges around getting through to them. I'm hearing that is lessening. So, perhaps you want to try again if you tried this before and couldn't get through. But just to say that option is still there. And they are still sort of pushing that as business support. And the last one's around the statutory sick pay, where there have been a little bit of change, a bit of flexibility. But again, this is something targeting specifically at SMEs. Just you can reclaim the statutory sick pay, perhaps more relevant where you have got staff that are on slightly longer term sick. So if you have got people who have now been affected by COVID, just to remember that you can sort of reclaim some of that back. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? So the last piece is around loans. This is access to financial support. So these are all the items that we know are available. Now, some of these are officially closed, but we know that the banks are offering similar things and certain flexibilities. But equally, these are the things to look out for next week in the spending review, because again, the Chancellor might well look to some of this or extending some of these just to be able to support businesses. So although this is what is currently in the arsenal in terms of government support, there may well be some expansions and extensions of this. I think the other thing to bear in mind with all of these is that, a lot of them are still open. They've had good take up, but you should still be sort of seeking that support. They're all accessed through the banks. So the first port of call really is to your bank around this sort of support. I would say as well, the last thing to sort of note on these are all loans. Obviously, there is an expectation that you will end up paying them back. Some of the time periods and things have been extended, so it does make them a little bit more attractive. I would suggest, if you are in sort of financial difficulties or you need some element of financial support, as well as reaching out to your bank, to reach out to the local authorities. So again, they have had quite a lot of government support. And whilst we aren't going to cover in detail the specific grants and things on offer from the local authorities, because they are doing it all in a slightly different way, depending on whereabouts you are in the country, I would suggest maybe your first port of call should be to your local authority, because whereas in the start of the pandemic, they were being quite restrictive with grants and keeping them for certain sectors such as hospitality, they've broadened that out a lot more now in recent weeks, because the government is providing a lot more backing to them. So something that is just worth checking is just check in with your local authority. Even if you've been told that you weren't eligible before, it's worth double checking again now, because a lot of them have moved their grant schemes on. So they are a lot broader. They relate to where you have an office. Some of them don't even relate to whether or not you have property. It can be where the business is registered, and you may still well be able to access grants. So have a think about that. Obviously, if you've got multiple offices, again, you may need to check there with a number of local authorities, but given that those are grants rather than loans, it is worth the effort, because they would be a grant that would allow you to keep the business running, perhaps more so than a loan, which is, you know, something that you'd ultimately have to pay back. So just worth recognising there. I think it's just, yeah, go back to your local authority and have another look, because they have had quite a lot over the last 3 or 4 months in terms of additional support from the government. Okay, next slide, please. So I think that kind of covers everything that we wanted to bring to your attention specifically. So what we've got time for now is an opportunity for questions, clarifications, and that can be either to myself or to Claire. So I'm going to kick off. Just a reminder that you can pop them in the chat, in the Q&A, and we will pick them up from there. I've got a few questions already for you, Claire. So if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the first one is around furlough and, you know, repayment, or there was some talk around this sort of people returning from furlough. There would be a sort of return to work retention payment that I know over the summer businesses were planning for. Now that payment wasn't due until next year. So can you just expand a little bit on where we are with that? Has it been cancelled? What is it that you should be checking up on with that?
Yeah, you're right. So they announced that there would be £1,000 bonus for people that were retained after the furlough period. Unfortunately, that has been cancelled. So yeah, when you could have submitted in January to claim that £1,000 for every person you brought back into the business that was on furlough, that has been cancelled for now. They did make a statement that they will be looking at a new job support scheme to combat that, but there is zero information anywhere. So anybody that had, I guess, calculated for that £1,000 per head for next year's budget, because you didn't have to give it to the employee. As an employer, you claimed for it. Anyone that's calculated that into the budget, unfortunately, it needs to come out, because there won't be any claim at this present time.
Okay, so that's an important one between HR and finance, isn't it? That's an important conversation to have, just to make sure that you've all kind of squared that one off.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So another question we've had was around people's eligibility to be furloughed. So again, there was some changes on this over the summer. This time around with the extended furlough scheme, are there any restrictions on eligibility? So do you have to have furloughed somebody before? Can you furlough them for the first time? Can you re-furlough people? Is there any restriction around people who can or can't be furloughed with this new extended scheme?
Yes, no, and yes, I think is the response. But I guess in more detail, so any company in the UK that has UK PAYE, so you're paying a salary to that individual, can make a claim. You also do need a UK bank account, I believe, as well. But yeah, you can make a claim. The important, I guess, things to know is that they have to be employed on from the 30th of November. So in order for that person to be considered to be furloughed, they need to have been an employee on the 30th of October, and also be part of a PAY scheme. And you need to have done some real-time submissions through the payroll system. That's a whole complicated piece on its own. So what I would say is that there's no restrictions as long as they were in employment, you are in the UK, you are classed as a worker. That is really important. So there is a much clearer definition now on the government website that explains what a worker is, and a worker can be a fixed term contract, can be part-time contract. There are even references to agency workers as well. So that is much clearer this time round. And the other part of your question, I think it's worth mentioning as well, around company directors. So company directors who are also on a PAYE can be furloughed, and they are still able to carry out reasonable actions that allow the company to continue. that's quite I guess a specific area. Again, there's a nice explanation on the government website that explains company directors. So I think this time round it does show that, you know, very clearly who in the pool of employee worker associated with an employee an organisation can be furloughed. I think there is still a little bit of uncertainty around people that have been recently made redundant. Can you bring them back on, rehire them, put them straight onto furlough? That's the yes, no, yes answer. You can, but again, there is some caveats. And I guess one of the big cautions to raise is if you have made someone redundant and you are bringing them back in, there's been some questions around what happens to that redundancy payment you may have already released. And also what happens to the relationship and communication between you and that person who was redundant, who's going to come back on as employee, and the likelihood is that they might be redundant again. So that's a real complex HR matter that I think would be better to discuss offline. Does that answer your question?
That does. No, that's brilliant. And I think there's something quite interesting in that, because the date of employment, I think, is quite a big change. Certainly something I hadn't picked up, that actually, say, for example, if you had a new starter in, you know, July or August on PAYE, then actually you'd be able to furlough them now. Whereas I think before there was quite a lot of concern, wasn't there, around the further we got away from the sort of March employer date,
yeah,
you know, that made it more complicated. So there's a sort of whole raft of people that may have been new starters that could now, you know, that we perhaps may have sort of assumed wrongly without checking the guidance that they weren't eligible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth going back and checking. There is some information that spells that out a little bit easier than maybe on this call here, but yeah, most of the information reports to has to be an employee on the 30th of October in order to be furloughed going forward.
Okay, no, that's really, so it's important, I think, clarification. Okay, and then there was, again, when the government was talking about the now cancelled job support scheme, they were sort of quite restrictive around you know, what was affecting the business that meant that people needed to be furloughed. So they were saying, you know, you would have to start to demonstrate that your revenue had been impacted. Now, can we just sort of roll that back to job retention scheme? Is that a little bit more flexible now? Because is there going to be less scrutiny? Is it? I'm just thinking, you know, perhaps some of our members might be affected by Brexit. There could be other things that are impacting, as well as COVID. How robust do they need to be in the sort of justification, or is it on the basis that actually, you know, they can demonstrate that you know, that they can't afford the employees? What's the current thinking on that, and how robust that needs to be?
So there isn't that as clear a guidance on that point, but having sort of spoken to other HR professionals in different organisations, it is very much being able to justify. So it's making sure you have got that relevant reason, and the relevant reason is around continuing to trade, continuing to have an income, continue to have a job for that person. So I think it's very much around by industry or by organisation as to what the impacts of not furloughing would be. I think that would be a better way to look at it, and quite robust as well. But we can keep watching that space, because I'm sure that question will start to come out, and there will need to be some more clarification written on the government website.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's really helpful. I really like that, actually. Yeah, what would happen if you didn't furlough them? And if you can answer that, then you've probably got your reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, no, that's an interesting one. And then just a last question on this. Around what people can and can't do whilst they're furloughed. So you've covered people, you know, people can take leave, which again was, you know, perhaps a bit sort of ambiguous earlier on. But if you, are there other restrictions around? So say if you're furloughing people over the Christmas period, can they get seasonal work? What's the current thinking on that?
So, so a person who might have multiple employers can be furloughed for some or all of the employers. So if you have somebody who works for you 2 days a week and you've popped them on furlough for a period of time, it doesn't mean to say they can't work for their other employer. You don't have any influence on that. So each person is entitled to have multiple furloughs. On the flip side, if they've been furloughed from an other employer, they can still work for you, and that also is not an issue at all. What they can't do is work whilst on furlough, but what they can do whilst on furlough is they can train. So if you want to use this opportunity to upskill them for maybe a new project in 2021, and you need to change the role slightly, so you want to increase the skill set of that person, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. So they can train. One of the interesting things that I can't quite get to the bottom of is, can they attend a virtual Christmas party? I've had that question, and right now I would say yes, but that's not an official yes. That's just, come on, why not? Yes. But we'll do some more digging on that. But the biggest thing is that even as a director of an organisation on furlough, you can't be seen to enhancing the profits. You can't be seen to enhancing the outcome of the business.
Okay, that's right. I love that virtual Christmas party. That is exactly the sort of thing where you need the FAQ, don't you, from the government? I'm sure that everybody's asking that.
Yeah, and I can't find the answer from anyone, but we'll keep trying.
Oh, bless you. Okay, well, I mean, that sort of follows on. So I've got a couple more, and just to remind people that we have got opportunity for, for questions. I think we'll have some time. So I've got a couple more, Claire. You're doing really well, thank you. The first one was just to elaborate. You talked about the communications with people on furlough. Could you just sort of summarise what you can't talk to people about, or how you can't ask them to access their email, or any restrictions, any sort of pointers in that space? I think just so that we're all completely clear would be really useful.
Yeah, sure. So if there was a missing password or something like that stopped you as someone still working, carrying out your role, then you can pick up the phone and say, what's the password for whatever website or whatever it is. That's okay, that's fair. If you was to do that 10, 12, 14 times a day, well, no, because that would be excessive. But yeah, if you need to contact them for something like that, that's not a problem. Also, can they access their emails? Yes, they can, but for keeping in communication. So if you had a weekly or monthly newsletter that went out, then they are able to log in and have a read of the newsletter. What they can't do is actually carry out a piece of work. And that's really, really important. I think the interesting thing is some people have the intention at the beginning of furlough that they'll furlough their employee for the full time, so 5 days a week for that period. I think the good thing now with the flexi furlough is that you can look to changing the furlough. So maybe the first week they're on full-time furlough, and then you see the gaps, and you can bring somebody back on part-time furlough or bring them back completely off of furlough. So that may help with that piece.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Claire. Right, so we've got another question come in around what a director can and can't do. So the specific question is it not acceptable for a director that's on furlough to be allowed to bid for new projects? Is that sort of activity, because obviously that's to do with making the business sustainable in the long term, is that acceptable on furlough or not?
Good question. What the wording says is reasonable duties as a director. And I think where they're probably coming from that is in order to service company house or your tax liabilities and things like that as a director. They are slightly more explicit around to not carry out work that would generate commercial revenue. So if you're on furlough, you can't do that. Now, a bid, I would probably say it comes in the commercial side of things. But remember, you can do flexi furlough. I'm not an expert 100% on the whole director piece, and I think we could do a bit more work, but I think you could probably do something around flexi furlough that allows you to work on the bids and then on furlough for the rest of the period of that month where you're not needed. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Okay, no, that's great. So then flexi furlough is very flexible, isn't it? You can do, what's the minimum amount of time that you can do a flexi furlough? Is it sort of literally half a day or a day if you needed to, come off of furlough and then be furloughed the rest of the time? Is it that flexible?
Yeah, pretty much. There's a couple of ways that it gets submitted from the payroll side, but you can be talking hours. So if you've recruited someone on a part-time contract that works hours for you rather than days, then you'll be submitting the hours that they worked during their normal week and claiming furlough for the remaining hours. So yeah, it does give you some flexibility.
Okay, so that's really helpful. And if you're, you can be really specific about time spent on actual bids. And needing to kind of just come off furlough for that. Okay, no, that's really useful, thank you. I've just got a final question. You mentioned Dse Assessments.
Yep.
Interesting one in that, we think of a Dse assessment as going around with a clipboard in the office, looking at, has everybody got a mouse? Is their keyboard? Have they all got hunchbacks where they're leaning over? How, how as a sort of, what's the onus on the employer to be doing that? Surely, we're not going around employees' houses with clipboards. So what's the acceptable way of doing a Dse assessment for your staff that will maybe well be working at home?
Two ways, really. You, as an employer, can walk through the form that would normally be on a clipboard, but will now be virtual. You can walk through that form with them. That does still feel a little bit too controlled because you're now in someone's personal home doing it. So the other way, which is my preferred way, is to share the information, share the tick list with the employee, walk them through the concepts, ask them to complete it, and then discuss the feedback that the form has highlighted with them in a more structured meeting. So yes, there is no need for tape measures and clipboards and things like that. It's a document that allows you to have a look at their setup, and then from that have a really great open conversation about what it is like working from home and how as an organisation you can help improve that experience for them.
Okay, no, I think that's going to, and just particularly because, we have got a bit of an open-ended question about how, how much longer this may go on for. I think the longer it goes on, the more nervousness you might feel as a business that are you really doing your duty by your employees? But so I think that's a really helpful kind of positive thing people can put in place, isn't it? That, they are trying and I think would be seen to be reasonable. Okay, great. Right. So I think that's it for us today. So thank you ever so much, Claire, and I appreciate your first webinar. That was fantastically helpful and informative. Lots of questions there that came up, so really, really appreciate your support on that. Just to remind everybody on this webinar, so we record all of these and you can replay them. So they're all on our website. We have a page where we put everything COVID-19 related. So we've got all of these up on the website. This one will be up on the website, and as and when things get announced, so I mentioned next week we've got the spending review. There might well be some more detail there around business support. I think potentially some of the finance packages might get a little bit of alteration in that. We will put all of that latest information on our website, so do keep checking back on our hub. We've got the detailed guidance notes on there. You've got the opportunity to link through and speak to Claire directly. So a number of things we've sort of flagged up and said, if you want an offline conversation about a specific set of circumstances, so that is all part of your ACE membership. So you can ask Claire's advice offline if you've got a particular challenge, something that's perhaps a little bit more technical that you need some input to. So do make the most of that over the next few months. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few of those coming your way, Claire, now that people know that you're here. So there's all of that. There's a link to the government resources. And lastly, just to say that although this one has been focused on COVID-19, we have a similar sort of cross-check, make sure you're ready for Brexit webinar as well, coming out in the next few weeks. So we are going to be putting that one online on the 7th of December. So again, watch out for that one because it will be similar, just kind of bringing everybody up to speed, a sort of one-stop shop for everything you need to know and think about in terms of Brexit. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that one, 7th of December for that. As always, everything is on our website. Please do keep in touch. So we're still working, we're still here, we're not furloughed at all at ACE. So, keep in touch with us, keep things coming back, whether it's feedback on how you're finding the markets or any specific requests for clarification or help. That's what we're here to do for you. So take care of yourselves, Thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you on a webinar or maybe even in person in future. Take care all. Bye.